right, so we're going to be talking now about how to remedy some of those common mistakes that you could be making when you're hanging your curtains. But before we start talking about the curtains, we need to address the rods. Okay, so when you have a rod, you want to think about how thick it is, how long it is, how high it is, and the finials that are on the end of it. Oh, and the color. We're going to talk about all of those. So when you have your window, you want to measure from outer edge to outer edge, and then you want to extend your rod 6 inches at least on both ends. So between 6 to 12 inches on the outside. I think 6 is the very minimum, 12 is the very maximum. I generally do 6, so maybe I'm making that mistake. But that somewhere in that middle ground is where the sweet spot is. Between 6 and 12 inches on the outside of each edge is how long you want your rod. Now, the bigger your window, the thicker your rod should be. If you know what like a cafe curtain is, and there's really thin curtain rods, the reason those are so thin is because it's generally a smaller, shorter window frame. So if you can kind of think about that, the thicker the rod goes with the wider the window. Okay, and maybe like 3/4 inch diameter-ish or so, half inch, 3/4 inch diameter would be a good one. And then you want to think about how high above the window, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky and a little bit sticky. So stick with me. So generally speaking, you want your curtain rod to be hung at least 2 inches above your window frame, up to about 12 inches. Some go even higher if you have like tall wall of windows. But if you kind of keep within that 2 to 12, that's a good range. For me, I generally start measuring 6 inches out, 6 inches high, and where that line intersects is where I start. And I kind of gauge, just kind of eyeball it a little bit. I put my rod up there and I see, is that about the right height? Does that feel good? If it feels a little too boxy, you want it higher. If you are going to choose to hang your rod low or high, always choose higher, because what's going to happen is your eyes are going to be drawn up. It's going to make it appear like your room is a little bit bigger than it is and your windows are a little larger than they are. One thing to keep in mind, let's say you don't have 6 to 12 inches to give to hang your rod. Let's say you have your window ledge, your window frame at the top ends, and you have 10 inches between the edge of your window and the ceiling. What my rule of thumb is to split the difference. So if it's a lower ceiling, and that would be 5. So I hang it at 5 and then out about 6. Another trick, if you have 2 windows in your room that are different sizes, you want to take the bigger window and try to mimic that sizing with the smaller window to make the smaller window appear to be bigger. So that might mean extending the rod a little bit bigger than you might need. It might be having curtains that are hanging a little bit longer, that kind of thing. And then let's talk about the color of your rod. If you have a color of your rod that's kind of an outline color that's not appearing anywhere else in your room, this is a really easy fix, but it can be something that's triggering your eye to think something doesn't look right. So let's say your rod is black and nothing else in your room is black. That's an easy fix. You just want to have something else appear in your room that's black about 3 times. So for example, in my room, my rod is black. Right now I'm looking at it and I have a black planter. I have a black ladder for my bookshelf, and I have some black picture frames. So that black has appeared 3 more times and it makes it tie into the black curtain rod. Same thing if you have a brass or wood or gold. As long as that color appears about 3 more times, you're good. Okay, we're going to take another break and we'll be back to talk about curtains. Okay, when you're thinking about your rod, you are also wanting to keep in mind the finial. And those finials are the things that are at the end of your rod, and they have a lot to say. Those teeny tiny little things say a lot. So here's kind of a general breakdown of what they say. If you have a finial that is a very simple design, maybe it's like a cap end, a small round cylindrical shape, that is going to speak, it's going to say classic, it's going to say a little bit more modern, it's going to say not fussy, it's going to say translatable. If you have one that is glass, that is going to say something more along the lines of fancy, timeless, elegant. If you have one that is scrolly, or has a little bit more detailed work, it's a little bit more ornate, those can speak something that they read a little bit differently to me. Those can be sometimes elegant, sometimes fussy, sometimes classic, sometimes stuffy. It depends really on the shape that's taking. Um, those can also be the ones that date themselves sooner than the other ones. So keep that in mind because they really do have a lot to say.